I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and We're Speaking starts now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to We're Speaking.
Hello, hello, hello. So if you've been paying attention to the news, the world, and since you're our audience, we know you have been, you've noticed, things aren't so great right now.
It's not all great. There's some great, but there's also COVID and MAGA corruption and a far-right authoritarian movement, culture wars, just a few little things that we need to really be paying attention to and addressing.
Yeah, but we can't ignore these challenges, right? We can't ignore them. But tonight we're going to focus on hope, because if we're going to get through these challenges, we must have hope, right? Like, we got to have that cheering, everybody feeling good in order to work through the difficult moments. So
right, that's what we have to keep coming back to, because we know one of the tactics on the other side is to try to suck our hope out of us and make us feel like everything's futile and there's nothing we can do. So in keeping with hope, in a few minutes, we're going to be speaking to Santiago Mayer, who at the age of 17, I don't know what you all were doing at 17, but
he was just 17. Sorry.
Okay. Anyway, Santiago founded Voters of Tomorrow, a youth-led nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to educate, engage, and represent Generation Z in politics and government by fighting political apathy.
Good stuff. So if you're feeling anxious about the world, the show is your lifeline. Grab your friends, send the link to everybody. You absolutely have to watch this one. But before
it's your lifeline, as opposed to what we're going to do next.
Next
which is to take a look at last week in the Republican Party.
What's the main message for this crowd tonight?
Well, it's a message of love. I mean, our country's going to hell.
M&Ms will not be satisfied until every last cartoon character is deeply unappealing and totally androgynous. Until the moment you wouldn't want to have a drink with any one of them.
Humpty Dumpty Biden sat on a fraudulent wall. Humpty Dumpty Biden is going to have a great fall.
Joe Biden is the guy they're going to call at 3 a.m. if there's a serious crisis with Russia.
This election was stolen for President Trump. President Trump won the 2020 election.
What's your message for voters of color who are concerned that without the John L. Lewis Voting Rights Act, they're not going to be able to vote in the midterm?
Well, the concern is misplaced, because if you look at the statistics, African-American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans.
Democrats accuse Republicans of wanting to keep people from voting. Why would we want to keep people from voting?
Our favorite Mark Milley tested positive for COVID yesterday.
Governor, have you received your COVID booster shot?
So that's something that, I think people should just make their own decisions on.
Look at the millions of people who simply rolled over for the experts, reflexively wearing useless cloth masks.
Where is Laura? I can't recognize you. Is that a mask?
This has been one of the scariest things to watch in my decades of covering politics and the culture. That compliance.
Giuliani seems to have some free time on his hands these days, as he appears to be selling autographed 9/11 t-shirts for $911.
How did a week? How can they manage to stuff so much insanity into such a short amount of time? And I am American, by the way, in addition to being African American. I just want to make that point clear.
Yes, but what neither of us are, Humpty Dumpty or Sexy Candy, which apparently is really in order to want to eat candy, you also need to want to have a drink with it. And I don't know what else Tucker Carlson wants to do with it, but apparently it needs to be in heels when he does it.
Yeah, I'm just picturing that dating app where you're just swiping on candy. Like, I can't wait for them to attack whatchamacallit like next. They're like, the latest in non-binary candy. No, like it's just
Whatchamacallit.
like how in the world are they expecting to get people on board with their platform when their platform is apparently a culture war against candy? Ha! Twixer.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was a real hot button issue for people. But at this point, whatever it is Tucker Carlson decides is a hot button culture war issue, then apparently the Republicans are going to go along with it.
Yep.
And I guess Mitch McConnell can say any old racist thing he wants these days, and no Republicans are going to feel the need to step up and say something about it.
Yeah, like the idea that was a slip of a tongue. I remember when I first saw the clip, I was like, oh, like immediately before I had even seen any commentary on it. Like I was just like, oh, he did it. He said it, didn't he? Oh, this is going to be funny. Yeah.
That thing with having a slip of the tongue, it's generally that you accidentally say out loud something that you know better than to say out loud.
Yeah.
So
thanks for telling us.
Saying the quiet parts out loud.
We appreciate it. Yes.
Yeah. Please reveal yourself. Take that hood right off and show us who you are.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
We do. Because everybody is paying attention. And you know who's really paying attention? Gen Z. They're watching the shenanigans and they're saying, none of that. We actually kind of want policies and things that actually make sense. So with that, we're going to bring in our guest. Please welcome the founder of Voters Tomorrow, Santiago Mayer. Hello. Hi. Welcome to We're Speaking.
Hi. Thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have a chance to talk with you.
Yeah, very much so.
I'm so excited to share everything we're doing.
Yeah. So at 17, you started it. Why did you start it? Why did you think it was needed?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Mexico City. I moved to the US in high school and I was already interested in politics. And when I moved here, being 16, it was in the middle of the Muslim ban. I saw everything that was going on and I wanted to talk about it with people in my class, with my teachers, with my classmates. And I realized that people didn't really know what was going on. So I took my frustrations to Twitter. I started talking about the fact that young people needed to be more involved. And for one reason or another, my tweets stuck. I started building an audience. And in 2019, as the primaries were heating up, I decided to do something with that audience and really start working to make young people engaged.
I love it. Taking action immediately.
I do too. And to be a recent immigrant to the United States, and immediately we hear so much from the Republican Party that is negative constantly about immigrants and their commitment to this country and their desire to be a part of America and try to make it better. And it is wonderful to have someone be very public, showing what utter bullshit that is that they spew at folks like you, because we really do. We appreciate your value so much as an American and also as a member of Gen Z. Last week we had John Della Volpe on from Harvard's Institute of Politics, who does polling, and he's just written this new book about Gen Z. And one of the things he talked about was really listening to what your generation has to say and saying, I hear you, but actually meaning it and doing the hearing. So to you, what does Gen Z being heard look like?
Yeah, so one of the biggest issues we have so far is that Gen Z has been breaking the historical trend and actually voting in elections. And we're not seeing that be represented by people in office. We're not seeing them recognize the political power of Gen Z and actually bringing us into the table and bringing us into the conversation. So one of the big things that we're working on right now is pushing the Biden administration to establish a White House Young Americans Advisory Council that would bring together a few Gen Z leaders across different areas of politics, across different areas of activism, people who work on climate, people who work on gun violence, and giving them a seat within the White House to shape policy. I won't pretend Gen Z knows everything. We don't, but we do have a very unique perspective on things. And I think it's important that people in power, especially the people that are older, listen to that.
It makes all the sense in the world because all of these policies that are being created now are going to affect your generation for decades. And so, in a way, it's a little crazy that we actually don't already have this. So, thank goodness that you are raising awareness about this and putting it out there. In addition to those, so one of the things I love is all of the concrete actions that are taking. Sometimes as adults, we're just like, ah, I just said adults like you're not an adult. I'm sorry, Santiago. I know you're an adult. When I'm thinking of like my generation, though, sometimes there's a lot of complaining, a lot of trying to figure things out, but actual very little implementation and action. And so I'd love to hear about some of the priorities and issues and things that you are making for just like heading into the midterms.
Yeah, so our goal is to register as many young voters as we can in a particular group of states. I think we're all focused on the same states. We're all focused on Nevada. We're all focused in Georgia. We're all focused in Arizona. These states are states with really close margins in both the 2020 elections and previous elections. And those are the places where Gen Z can really show their political power and show that there really are political kingmakers. So we're focused on registering and turning out voters there. We are trying to match, if not exceed, the 2018 voter turnout within our age demographic by being on the ground and meeting young people where they are. So that involves doing a lot of research, trying to understand what motivates the generation at large, regardless of their partisan affiliation. That means talking to people and engaging in conversation, even when we disagree. And at the end of the day, that's not as hard as it sounds because overwhelmingly Gen Z is pro-democracy. They have rejected the authoritarian movement coming from the right multiple times, both in 2018 and 2020. And young voters know that democracy is at stake and they will fight to defend it.
A minute ago, you said that you know that your generation doesn't know everything. No generation does. And I think part of the problem that we have is that the generations that have come before yours have decided that they do know everything and that we don't need to be listening to you folks. So we want to hear what you have to say. What are the priorities? What are the issues that young voters heading into the midterms are really concerned with? What motivates your generation? What are you going to be voting on? What's going to turn out the vote?
Yeah, so over the next few weeks, Source of Tomorrow is going to be releasing a Gen Z agenda, which showcases all the political issues that young voters care about. And this is research-based. This is based on polling. This is based on talking to young voters. It is not based at all in any partisan or ideological leaning. Any ideological leaning in there is the ideological leaning of Generation Z at large. So that's going to be released over the next few weeks. But overall, Gen Z really wants tangible things that they can see and feel in their daily lives. So that is gun legislation, things that will keep us safe. That is making sure that our schools and our colleges and the places where we spend most of our time are safe, both from guns, like you said, or from COVID. We are seeing a huge movement to ban mask mandates and to ban vaccine mandates, especially in Republican states. And that is simply unacceptable to most students who understand that their COVID is still a very real threat to their safety. And some of our student leaders, especially in Texas, for example, they're organizing a walkout to protest all of these measures because they deserve and they are demanding a safe learning environment where they can feel comfortable paying attention to class and don't have to be worried if the kid next to them is coughing because who knows, they might get COVID.
Yeah, every time I'm on a plane and somebody coughs, I'm like, I want to like give them a jab. I'm like,
Imagine trying to listen to math class or trying to learn calculus while also having that concern. It gets really hard.
That's exactly it. Because, a lot of adults have been allowed during the pandemic. We're like, we're going to take it easy. But kids are still expected to go to school, expected to get the grades, expected to apply to college. And so in a way, you're bearing, a lot of this burden and still being active and positive and optimistic, which I think is pretty freaking amazing. At the same time, this culture of fear that's being created by the far right, they're also trying to engage Gen Z. And so I'm curious about what you and your group are seeing in the attempts and the success of right-wing groups that are actually trying to radicalize young voters.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of efforts by groups like Turning Point USA and Today's America to really create content that is meant for Gen Z. I think one of the biggest issues they run into is that most of their staff is not Gen Z. They don't really understand the game, but they're still trying. And that's really created a gap in the space and a huge vacuum because there are not that many groups in the pro-democracy coalition that are playing in that space, that are making that content. For every Gen Z for Change in TikTok, there's like 70 Ben Shapiro's with very large followings. And these people misrepresent facts. They radicalize people through sheer misinformation. And that can have very dangerous consequences at the polling place. So what we're doing is we're running a really large counter misinformation campaign that will present the facts. We know that Gen Z trusts authorities, so we're talking to experts, we're putting them out there, we're making sure that their voices are being heard by the people who need to hear them. We're also publicizing sources that Gen Z trust. Even though most people don't think of traditional media as being trusted by young voters, we know that the New York Times still scores really highly in trustworthiness by Gen Z. Same with even more conservative outlets like the Wall Street Journal. So we're promoting those sites, we're promoting their pieces because at the end of the day, they are fact-based and we want their information to reach the people that need to hear it.
Media literacy, yay.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I was your age, I had been taught that you read the Times, you read the Post, you read the Wall Street Journal, and then you assess for yourself out of all those different sources that have left biases and right biases, and somewhere in there is your truth, but it's interpretation of facts regardless. So I'm very happy to hear that your generation is more sophisticated than an awful lot of folks in my generation have turned out to be, because we have bit hook, line, and sinker on a lot of the false information that's out there and trusting any sources. Do you see your generation being and your digital natives? Are you better consumers of what is online?
It is kind of a mixed bag. And the reason for that is that there is just so much disinformation on social media that being able to tell everything apart gets really hard. And since most of Gen Z spends a lot of time online, we consume more of that information than most other people. But the fact that we've been online for that much of our lives has given us really good tools to decide what's real or what's not. So if you see a website that's like patrioteagle.maga.xyz, that's probably not a trustworthy source. So, which is something that sounds really ridiculous, but for a lot of particularly much older people, they wouldn't be able to tell that. They would just see a headline, they would just see an authoritarian author, and they would go with it, right? And that's I think something that's really it won't make a large difference, but it takes a small chunk of people off the misinformation train. Similar with videos, you can see that there's a lot of really badly produced and really badly sourced videos all over social media, and Gen Z has kind of figured out the way to tell what's real and what's not. If you see someone that's just like running around interviewing people, sure, there might be some facts to it, and the people talking might have some very legitimate opinions, but that's probably not the best source to base your entire opinion from. So again, it's a mixed bag. There's also some really well produced that shows that just spread fake information. and those get really hard to tell apart. But for most of it, we do accept less of this information than older generations.
It's so interesting to me because I have a 14-year-old and she saw all sorts of information when she was in middle school on TikTok. And a lot of it she believed because it came from influencers. And so to them, it's that the authority bias where they're like, oh, that person has millions of followers, so they must be telling the truth. And so I absolutely love that you're doing this counter misinformation campaign. And is this something that is going to be specifically focused on the states that you are trying to get the young voters out in, or is it just like TikTok across the board?
So we're working on against misinformation across the board. We're not focusing any of that. That is totally non-political, non-partisan. We want people to have facts. Our efforts in the specific states that we're focused on are more in making sure that people vote for endorsed candidates. And that's something that we're going to be working on as we roll out endorsements after the primaries wrap up. But for misinformation specifically, it is something that we're working on with our chapters. And every state that we have a chapter in, we're going to be providing resources so that they can fight misinformation on campus. We're going to be doing digital ads and digital campaigns to fight misinformation, as well as partnering with organizations that can create organic content that would be able to fill the gap that's being left by the pro-democracy coalition in digital spaces.
It seems to me that the initiatives that are happening in Virginia, and we definitely see it happening in Florida with Ron DeSantis trying to censor, control what is going to be taught in
everywhere,
all sorts of public schools, all the way through trying to intimidate college professors. And I can see the messages that they're trying to send, that it creates discomfort for white people to have to learn accurate US history. I can see that resonating with my generation and older generations, but for Gen Z, I would think that this would be so incredibly offensive to your generation, and you're such a huge voting bloc. Do you see a potential real backlash and unintended consequence for the politicians who are out there pushing this stuff?
Oh, 100%. And we've warned them in social media. They've just decided not to listen, but this is going to blow up in their faces. I mean, Generation C was mostly the pushing force behind all the Black Lives Matter protests that we saw in 2020. Gen Z understands the fact that there is a really large income inequality, that there's really a lot of income inequality in the country. And especially when you have comments like Mitch McConnell's that just really say the quiet part out loud, it becomes very clear that all of these measures are not really meant to prevent any discomfort, but they're meant to punish people for believing the truth, really. Yep. And that is just something that Gen Z will not accept. I mean, Ron DeSantis tried to defund universities where students disagreed with him, and students very quickly figured out how to use it against him. We're going to figure out how to use all of these tools against Glenn Youngkin. I know some people on TikTok are already filling up his inbox with false reports of uncomfortable topics. And they also open up themselves to a lot of ridicule. I mean, if any topic that makes students uncomfortable is now illegal to teach, what about the Pledge of Allegiance? What if that makes people uncomfortable? What if someone is uncomfortable learning calculus? Is that something that's also going to be banned?
I'm uncomfortable. I was very uncomfortable.
Right. And if anything that makes students uncomfortable is illegal, it's not one topic or the other. You can't just say only these topics make students uncomfortable. Right. You have to make sure that people are being heard in every way. So I'll wrap that up, but it's going to blow up in their faces. It's going to be really fun to watch.
Well, and that's what I love about Gen Z is like they're so practical and so rational. And it's like, you know what? Fine. You want to make school irrelevant? We'll just go learn all the information on TikTok. We'll create the content for ourselves. And so it's really interesting to see everybody calling all of these out of touch leaders out of touch, because they are, and they're making themselves irrelevant. And it's very interesting to watch. I want to know how groups like the Lincoln Project, how other groups can help harness this movement. What are the things that we can be doing to help support?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing any group can do is have people on the ground that are meeting Gen Z where they are. I think one of the big issues that we've seen, especially in Virginia's elections last year, is the fact that there were really no people organizing students. There were really no people working and talking and understanding what students care about. And that really hurt Terry McAuliffe's campaign. So we need to avoid that everywhere in 2022. And that means that we're going to have to invest very bigly and very early in making sure that we have people who can understand what Gen Z cares about and what will motivate them to vote. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're encouraging candidates to do. That's what we're encouraging outside groups to do, because Gen Z is the one of, if not the most reliable pro-democracy vote. And it is going to be really hard to win without Gen Z.
That is such a wonderful place for us to wrap up, Santiago. You give us so much hope for the future, and not the distant future, but like November. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It is so important, and please make sure you're staying in touch with us so we can help spread the information for you, because you're a huge part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Yes, if you're not already following him, please do.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Santiago. Seriously, great. I am, once again, every time I talk to someone from Gen Z, I'm consistently blown away by how practical, pragmatic, rational they are. And I think we're seeing this huge contrast now between what the GOP does in spouts and then what the young people are saying. It's like this chasm that's opening up. And I think he's very right. It's going to blow back and blow up in their faces. I see it happening in real time.
Yeah. And I think that practicality and all that this generation, the resilience that we talked about last week with John Della Volpe, our generation, I think we get emotionally and psychologically fatigued and defeated and really fearful, and we find that sucks our energy. And you and I talk a lot about, we've got to like lift ourselves back up and get back into it again and recharge and don't give up. That's what they want. Gen Z just seems to find like a lot of power in that. Like, really? You're going to tell us that we're not going to have a democracy to live in the future? Yeah, let's see. Let's see how that works out.
Yeah, they're like, we're going to go ahead and create like an app and an algorithm that's going to flood your like hotline with this. It's like immediately right there to solutions. Like, they're solutions-based generation, and I am loving that. And to that end, before we go, do you ever feel like alarms are going off all around
and how
you?
do you react when they do? Do you listen to them?
Yeah, or do you ignore them and hope that they go away?
Yeah, we're telling you over and over again, the alarms are going off. We can't ignore them. You've got to address them, or else things are just going to get worse. Trust us. We've been there as recently as last week. It's a little bit later, but since we need reasons to be really happy and dance a little bit, the Supreme Court's decision that they are not going to, what is that?
That is an alarm. So I'll leave you to talk about democracy while I check and see if my house is not on fire.
All right.
Sound like a plan?
All right. Come back soon.
All right. That is an alarm. This is what I was talking about earlier. It was like, this is what we need for democracy. You know, when the alarm's going off, you just act. immediately, and that is what I did. Well, that's pleasant.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you. Hi. You know, so that's got to be all of us. The fire people putting out the fires. Democracy's burning.
Yep.
We have to answer the call. We can't just sit around and do what I did briefly. Where
or me. And huge credit to our Gen Z editor on We're Speaking, Katie, who created that brilliant video for us, who did exactly what we're talking about. She saw that moment that we had in the show last week. She grabbed it. She made something powerful out of it. And so, God, thank you. We're excited to have Gen Z involved in our show. And at the Lincoln Project. It's important. It really matters.
It does matter. So that has been our show this week. We are hoping you'll follow us. I'm at Maya on stage. Lisa's at LC Senegal on Twitter. You can always keep the conversation going with us. Next, tomorrow. You're going to have the breakdowns back with
with Mary Trump.
Yeah, a pretty good guest.
That's a pretty good guest. That's going to be a great interview. I'm really looking forward. 7:00 Eastern time tomorrow night with Rick Wilson and Tara Setmayer. Make sure you tune in for that interview with Mary Trump, and we will see all of you next Wednesday.
See you next week.